if I were an advocate of the psychological criterion, then how would I respond to Ulson's argument? Well, it's valid, so the problem has got to be with one of the premises. Premise 1 looks pretty good. There is an animal sitting in your chair, a human animal sitting in your chair. Premise 2, maybe that's a little bit dodgier. Premise 2 says the human animal sitting in your chair is thinking. Is that right? Maybe I could say this. Sure, there are lots of interesting things going on in the vicinity of the animal, sort of thought-like things going on in the vicinity of the animal. But strictly speaking, the animal isn't thinking. Animals just aren't the kinds of things that can think. People can think, and the person isn't the animal. So it's kind of like this. It's like, take a book. A book is a highly sophisticated object, lots of interesting things going on in the vicinity of the book, but it would be a mistake for me to say the book had any beliefs. Strictly speaking, the book doesn't believe anything. It's just a book. The author of the book may have had beliefs. He may have put those down in the book. She may have asserted things in the book. But the book itself doesn't have any beliefs. Likewise, the person in the close vicinity of the animal may have some, it may be thinking, but the animal isn't thinking. It's just not the kind of thing that can think. I could say that. It doesn't really sound like a very good response. I mean, Ulson can say, wait a second, what do you mean the animal isn't thinking? I mean, the animal has a brain. The brain is processing information. As a result of that information, the animal is interacting with the world. The animal is thinking in the information represents things in a very abstract way. It looks like the animal is making inferences, inferring some things from other things. These are all characteristics of thought. I mean, what more would be taken for thought? I mean, remember the Turing test for thought. The animal can certainly pass the Turing test. It can pass any conceivable test for thinking. I mean, to take the view that the animal isn't thinking here, you'd have to think that I could give a complete description of exactly how the animal is and has been for the last 20 minutes and still not be able to establish whether or not it was thinking. Because the description of how the animal has been for the last 20 minutes is a description of how the person has been for the last 20 minutes. And so if the person's thinking and the animal's not, then we're going to have to, whether or not the thing is thinking is going to depend on things outside of what's happened to it in the last 20 minutes. But that's crazy. We don't need to know more about the entity than how it is right now and what it's been doing in the last 20 minutes in order to establish whether it's thinking. So it seems very unpromising to try to resist the idea that the animal is thinking. It's got all the characteristics that one could possibly hope for of a thinker. I'm always working on the assumption here that you are thinking, but I don't know, it's fair enough. Okay, so premise 2 looks pretty good. I take it that advocate of the psychological criterion is going to have a great difficulty resisting that premise. It's going to sound rather implausible if you try to resist that premise. Okay. Premise 3, what about that? You are a thinking being sitting in your chair. That looks pretty good too. So premise 4 is where all the action is going to be. Premise 4 says there is at most one thinking being sitting in your chair. Recall that from last time we talked about multiple occupancy. We talked about the idea that there can be two things with all the same parts at a particular time that nonetheless remain distinct things. So there can be two things in the same place with all the same parts at the same time. An advocate of the psychological criterion is very likely to say that's exactly what's going on in this case. There are in fact two thinking beings sitting in your chair. There's the animal and there's the person. And they're different because they have different persistence conditions and they have different pasts and possibly different futures. The animal was a fetus, you weren't a fetus. And so on this view, Premise 4 is just false. There's more than one thinking being sitting on your chair.